So when did the nut take over the nut house? I'm the nut house.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video, I will be reviewing Batman Begins. This was such a good movie, and I hate to admit that this was the first time I actually watched this movie. I'm quite happy that I decided to finally watch it. I'll talk about the positives, and then I'll go into the negatives. Let's start off with the whole origin story. I really like the origin story depicted in this movie. I know it's the same old thing that every time we're introduced to a different version of Batman, we always have to see his parents get shot and him get all depressed. But in this one, I feel like it was done the best. I thought that this was the best origin story because you really did feel the emotion from Bruce's parents dying, and you really could see Bruce struggle with the fact that he genuinely thought that it was his fault that his parents were killed. To also learn that he always had the fear of bats, and the fact that he believes that his fear of bats is what got his parents killed, is very impactful, and I just love how it comes back to him becoming Batman, the thing that he fears the most. I also like the training montages in this movie as well. I wouldn't exactly call them montages, but I just like the fact that we get to see Bruce train to become Batman. I like the whole premise of being able to face your fears and then to become the fear yourself. I feel like a lot of this movie could really be used in the real world. Like getting over your fear and being able to accomplish many things is actually a very good life lesson in my opinion. I also really like the fact that they give a very solid reasoning as to why Batman refuses to kill. Basically, Bruce says that killing criminals makes you no better than the criminals themselves. What this means is the fact that if, let's say, Batman stopped a criminal by killing him, then in fact, he would be replacing that murderer with himself, who is the murderer of the murderer. I really like this reasoning because it shows how noble Batman is, and that he really does want to see justice served. I also really like Michael Caine in this movie as Alfred. I feel like Michael Caine is the perfect Alfred, and he's very witty in this movie and genuinely does care for Bruce. I like how no matter what Bruce says to Alfred, that Alfred is always there when he is needed the most, and always seems to help Bruce with his struggles, as well as helping him become Batman. He also was the comedic relief for this movie, and the comedy was never overbearing. In this movie, it was always quick little jabs at Bruce from Alfred, and it was quite funny. Let's talk about the villains a little bit. So from what I gather, the main villains are Scarecrow, as well as Ra's al Ghul. I really enjoyed Scarecrow a lot more than Ra's al Ghul. Don't get me wrong though, I really like Ra's al Ghul, and I feel like Liam Neeson did a great job playing him, but there's just something about Scarecrow that's awesome. I really wish that we got more out of Scarecrow, because for me he's one of my favorite villains of Batman. I also think the actor that played Scarecrow did really well, and I feel like he's suited for the role. I honestly did not expect to see Scarecrow in this movie, but he was a nice addition, and I just wish we got more of an idea of where he came from, and I also wish that we saw more of the experiments that he did on his patients. I understand that they probably really couldn't have shown anything that Scarecrow did to his patients, because that probably would have been too scary for the general audience. I just hope that one day, and hopefully in the next Batman movie, that we see Scarecrow, and I hope that they really go in depth with his character and go into the horror aspect of what he's really like and what his fear toxin can really do. I also found it pretty ironic and funny that when Scarecrow didn't have his mask on and Batman was running around, he seemed so vulnerable and scared. I also really liked the part where, towards the ending, that Rachel tased him in the face. That was pretty funny. As for Ra's al Ghul, I feel like they really didn't show much of him. I will say though, I really liked the twist, where it was actually Liam Neeson that was Ra's al Ghul, not the other guy that was supposedly killed in the mountains. To be honest, that's pretty smart of his character, to not really tell anybody who he actually is. This movie really shows that Ra's al Ghul thought he was the good guy, and that he was the arbiter of justice. But really, when you think about it, his reasoning is just wacky. I just want to say that I'm not complaining about it, I'm just pointing out how dumb this guy is. I understand that he doesn't like the common criminal. Nobody really does. But his way of trying to eradicate crime is just whack. In the beginning, he wants to stop crime, but he lumps them all together at the very end and thinks the entirety of Gotham is full of criminals, which technically he is right, but Batman sees that he could be the hope that Gotham needs to end crime. It was also pretty satisfying at the very end when Batman beats Ra's al Ghul at his own game. It was also really cool to see Batman actually create his own Batsuit. We all know that Batman created his own Batsuit, but I feel like they never really showed us that aspect of the character before. And I'm sure they did in the comics, but in live action we never ever saw the process of creating the Batsuit. It's kind of like a parallel to the Iron Man movies. The reason why I say this is because Batman is always learning, just like Iron Man. Why I bring this up is because around the middle of the movie, we see Batman trying to jump from one building to another, but it goes horribly wrong. And so, after this, he goes to Lucius Fox and asks about capes so then he can use it like a parachute. I just really like the fact that Batman seems to always learn from his mistakes so that he can be better and better, so it's less likely that he can be defeated in battle. The other part that I really liked was when we first see the Batmobile in action. Funny thing about this scene was that I was originally going to mention something about this and that it was a problem because Batman is always about not killing people, yet he clearly ran over a cop car with police officers in it. Luckily, the writers knew that this was probably going to be an issue with people, so they have a scene later on where Alfred actually confronts Bruce about this. You see, this is what I love to see in movies, is that there are consequences to your actions. Bruce was always talking about how he should be the symbol of hope, whereas Alfred is worried that he's going to enjoy the fame and just only do it for the thrill. Alfred is right in this situation, because if Bruce starts to see how popular he's going to get, then that's just going to go to his head, and he's going to start being more brash and end up making more mistakes. I just love how Alfred is portrayed in this movie as a real parent figure to Bruce, and always scolds him when he does something wrong, and doesn't just bow down to him. Man, there were so many good things about this movie. With every movie, unfortunately, there's always something that isn't the best. And for me, the parts that weren't the best were the fight scenes. I want to be clear and say that I really did enjoy the fight scenes, but my problem with them was that there seemed to be too many cuts. Let me explain, and I will use Daredevil as an example. So in Season 1 of Daredevil, there's this hallway scene, and it's pretty famous, and I'm pretty sure you all know what I'm talking about, where it was like a 5-minute fist fight with no cuts at all. For me, this is the perfect fight scene, because we get to see how brutal fighting is, and we don't miss a second of the fight. I understand if a movie can't do that, because that does take a lot of choreography, and it can be quite challenging to pull off a scene like that. My problem is if there is a cut every 2 seconds in a fight, then you really don't know what's going on in that fight, and you wouldn't know who's winning, who's losing, and what kind of damage is being caused. This movie for some reason had an issue with that, and admittedly towards the end it got a lot better, but at the beginning it was very distracting. Anyways, what would I rate Batman Begins? Well, I'm going to rate it an 8 out of 10. The reason why I say 8 out of 10 was because of the fact that we don't get as much Scarecrow as I would have liked. And it's because some of the fight scenes were a bit too chaotic because of the many cuts. Otherwise, this movie was amazing. It was the perfect length and had a good story to it, and I just love the characters. The next film that I will be reviewing is The Dark Knight, which is one of the best comic book movies of all time, and I have seen it many, many times. so I cannot wait to review it. Thank you all so much for watching my review, and see you in the next video.